I just got shot. They're going to rush me to the hospital.
Let's go, everybody back. This is close. We got to go to the south side.
No, not one bit.
In the blink of an eye, a New York City street teeming with summer strollers became a shooting gallery. Police say Jeffrey Johnson, clothing designer laid off a year ago, stalked his former boss, Steven Ercolino, and he shot him down dead on the sidewalk, repeatedly firing shots when he was on the ground. When the gunman then fled up Fifth Avenue, a construction worker from Westchester pursued him, alerted police that happened to be nearby. Jeffrey Johnson fell in a hail of bullets. 9 bystanders, though, were wounded, apparently by the ricochet of those bullets. Now, it's not that unusual for innocent bystanders to be hit by crossfire between police and a suspect. I mean, consider the conditions. You have to make nanosecond decisions here. I mean, take last year in Brooklyn, a 57-year-old woman killed apparently by an errant police bullet fired by officers on the scene. Even on a crowded street, they were outside the Empire State Building on Friday. As they said, police officers trying to shoot if they have a clear shot at someone they consider a threat. Essentially, it is a judgment call. If you look at the policy and procedures, it is somewhat open-ended, or a guest can speak to that in a second. But people are asking the question, when all the casings on the ground were from police revolvers here, is that protocol and procedure, should it be changed? And a study indicates that officers hit their targets only 34% of the time. Now, to explain, we're joined by John Shane, professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. He's an expert on police policy and practice and a former law enforcement officer himself. And I want to be clear, I can't imagine, nor can I think, with the exception of you and at this table, what it must be like coming on a scene, adrenaline's rushing, you just heard somebody was shot, killed, and a guy's reaching into a satchel, left that part out, to pull out a gun, and the police drew their weapons, shooting him fatally. But you always have to consider, right, the potential collateral damage. And in this particular case, you had 9 other people that were shot, ricochet or by stray bullets by police, 1 fatally, in fact. How do you mitigate that? Trying to calculate the risk and the reward of the scene as people see playing out in real time there on our TV.
What you do your best is take it to a training scenario, take it into a very controlled situation, and you put the officers through these sorts of paces as best you possibly can and try to replicate these things in real time and let officers go through them. And this way, when they do encounter these things out in the field, they're prepared for it.
Now, we were talking before, Dom, in our morning meeting, and people who know officers, once they go through the academy and once they become full officers, they have to go for, you can speak to this far better than me, they have to go for certification here, and they go to basically shoot targets every 6 months. And guys got busy jobs, they got lives at home. The only practice they're really going to go is if they go to a range to get ready for it. It's few and far between. Do cops have enough training and time, even once they get on the force, with their firearm?
Well, they do the best they can with the time that they have allotted. Let's leave it at that. Training could be better or training time could be better allotted to police departments. We know that. And if we look historically across a wide swath of research in policing, the amount of time that's dedicated to training is very, very minimal. And the in-service training is very minimal. And the reality is that it's not like a fire department where you're sitting around training waiting for the next call. Every minute of a police officer's time is uptime. You're up doing something, you're out in the field, you're deployed, you're working. So to take them out of that position and to dedicate more and more time to training only increases things like overtime or the size of the police force. And we are in a time now when police departments are cutting back. They're not going in the other direction.
So what's the answer? I mean, people sit back and they say, listen, I think every person, I haven't heard one person criticize the police for acting rashly. They see a guy reaching in to grab a gun, pulling out a gun, and they use force, deadly force here to stop this guy who'd already taken an innocent life. But what do you say to the other families who happen to be around there? I mean, what happens if something, God forbid, happened in Times Square next week? I mean, how do you mitigate what's around you in a crowd of people and try to create less tragedy than stopping the one perpetrator? I mean, what kind of training, what kind of guidance, what kind of policy can address that?
Well, the policy that's in place right now, as I've seen it, is sufficient. You're not going to make it any more tight because
it's intentionally open-ended, right?
Well, it leaves room for discretion. You're not going to remove discretion from police work. You're going to have to give police officers the flexibility to respond to a situation and try to de-escalate as best you can. You can't put in place something that says, well, if there's a bystander nearby, you shall not shoot. If you do that, you run the risk of that offender capturing someone, taking them hostage, shooting and killing the police officer, or escalating the situation worse than it already is. Yep. So you can't necessarily make it tighter, but what you have to do is train the police officers that when they're confronted with these things, that they need to use their presence and their verbal commands as best they possibly can to get somebody to put that gun down, while at the same time trying to seek cover and concealment and get, if they can, get this person into a position where they can fire. Perhaps there's a building behind them, so the bullets would hit the building and use it as a backstop instead of flying down the street.
Uniform on. Can you describe for the audience what it's like, that adrenaline rush, and you're on the move, you don't know what's around the corner? Can you try and put that in context? I mean, you were in Newark here, so it wasn't like you were just writing summonses all day. I mean, there were some rough areas, obviously, that you had to address within the unknown.
Yeah, and the answer is it's an indescribable type of situation. You can't replicate this for anybody. It's tough to describe. The reality is that you are probably exhausted. You might be running. You're filled with adrenaline, your hands are shaking, you're nervous. When you come around the corner, is somebody laying in wait, or had they continued running? And you're doing this all in the name of public safety. The bigger duty-bound obligation is for you to stop this person from hurting someone else. And you're putting yourself forward to do that on behalf of the public. Not an easy thing to ask police officers to do.
And I would imagine when you're trying to calculate all these things in your head, and we've talked in this show before, there was a tragedy just yesterday, in fact. Person running, fleeing with vehicle, police chase, innocent bystander killed in the process of the pursuit. You're there to uphold the law and to enforce the law, but at the same end, you got to consider, again, what we talked about, collateral damage. Are these the kind of debates that are happening at the academy, in precincts, at the top levels, at schools, where you guys are talking about, do we have to consider some of the potential damage that might outweigh arresting a perpetrator? You know, is that even possible to do that?
Yeah, well, those things are all talked about, and they're debated at precinct levels with sergeants and supervisors, and they're debated in legal circles, and they're certainly debated at universities. And we train our students at John Jay College about these debates and how to form the best decision possible and use rational decisions to inform your judgment. The reality is that when you are confronted with this life and death situation that is evolving in seconds, you hopefully have all the training and tools necessary to make the decision the right one at that given moment. It's intensely idiosyncratic. It's intensely context specific. So what may have taken place today does not necessarily take place tomorrow. And it's driven by these dynamics that change in an instant. And we have to give the police the benefit of the doubt. And the law does do some of that. And in terms of qualified immunity, we give the police a little bit of latitude to make these kinds of decisions. And if somebody is injured along the way, we step back, we use it as a training tool, learning from some sort of error that has taken place. And in the end, there's a social cost to policing. There's a social cost and there's a monetary cost in terms of what people are going to be compensated for their injuries, and socially, things like legitimacy.
And for anyone ever thinking that police got an easy job, just think about what happened outside the Empire State Building and the split-second decisions and some of the unfortunate tragedies that come out of it. But John Shane, great job. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, we'll wrap things up, everyone, when we return.